Right, thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. I'm honored and inspired by the organization, the IBF, and thank you so much, everyone, for your attention. And may the energy that we're putting out here today into the field carry the message of these ideals to the many being like everyone, everyone in the world. How much does it cost to take a deep breath? How long does it take to take a deep breath? What is required to turn your attention to shifting the pace of the breath? It's nothing. It costs nothing. It weighs nothing. It has no gravity. It's easy to carry the breath. You can take it with you everywhere you go. So allow me to launch our time together with just one gong here. I'll play the gong again later when we breathe for peace. Turn your attention inward. Let's be sure that we have the right setting. One of the most powerful things about breath practice is that it is the easiest of all the ancient rituals and ways of honoring nature and honoring ourselves as a part of nature. It's the easiest, most accessible ritual that there is, to just simply take a moment. And yet we don't do it, or most people don't do it. I'm hoping that perhaps many of you do. But most people are caught up in the patterns of habituation and so forth. And then science has not yet done the best job of letting us know how powerful the breath is. I think science and scientists are kind of mystified by how simple and accessible the breath is. Changing the pattern of the breath, deepening and lengthening the breath, and slowing down the breath or speeding up the breath. It all just seems too simple. It doesn't cost enough. You can't monetize it. You can't patent the breath. So it becomes this thing that's impossible to make into a product, which is great. That's the power to the people side of all of this. And then how beautiful just moments ago to think about breath practice in children's classrooms and breath practices in the Veterans Administration and breath practices in, I don't know, could we get breath practice into Congress? Could we get breath practice into not the veterans, but the soldiers? Of course we could. It doesn't cost anything. But the problem is that breath practice doesn't make you more hysterical. And hysteria is required for certain types of commerce and certain types of political activity. for whatever. So let's don't get caught in that. What I'd like to do now is go to some PowerPoint slides and just have a discussion with you from my perspective as a doctor of Chinese medicine and as a founder of a nonprofit which is called the Healer Within Foundation, and as the founder and chief instructor of a training center for Tai Chi and Qigong teachers. So let me just go to share my screen. So as a doctor, part of my work is to figure out how to support people in medicating themselves. And one of my earliest discoveries, first yoga class, 1963, studied to be a Chinese doctor, 1974, clinical practice, 1977, founding the Institute of Integral Qigong and Tai Chi around 1995, being a part of founding the National Qigong Association in 1995, founding the Healer Within Foundation in 2000. So all of these are based on, shall we say, inspiring citizens to understand the most profound medicine. And I'm a doctor of Chinese medicine, so predisposed to the framework of the Chinese medicine tradition, although Ayurvedic medicine, very similar, Arabic medicine, very similar, all the shamanic medicine systems based on the same ideas. And so first, just allow me to say happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. So every day is breath day. Every moment is breath moment. Every moment is a new moment. Every moment is a moment in which we can shift our attention. And what is the easiest way to shift our attention? Well, to take a deep breath, to shift the pattern of the breath. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to pay anything. You don't have to carry anything. You don't have to leave the chair you're sitting in. You can do it in your car. You can do it while you're texting. You can do it while you're waking up and going to sleep. You can change the pace of your breath while you're sitting on the toilet. And hopefully by the time we get to the end of this, you'll see how powerful, you probably already know all this stuff, how powerful breath medicine is. And it may just motivate you to personally and spread the word on doing breath practices while you're sitting on the toilet. Breath medicine is the foundation of healing, psychology, and spirituality of every original human culture. And what this means is healing is typically associated with the body because we get uncomfortable or we have syndromes and so forth. So that's the body is one of the three treasures. We'll be talking more about three treasures. Psychology is associated with what the ancients called the heart mind. Heart mind. Not mind, not just mind, not just heart, but heart mind. When the mind and the heart are coherent. And then breath medicine is the foundation of spirituality, of all the shamanic systems. Main message: the most profound medicine is produced within the human body for free. And it's my intention to point to this from both the shamanic point of view and from the science point of view. So all the breath practices of all the different and various societies and cultures, uh, in through my experience, distill into 4 archetypal breath methods that are targeted at the 3 treasures. And so by the time we're done with our time together here today, I will reveal those 4 archetypal methods. You probably are already familiar with them. And we'll talk a little bit about how they apply to the 3 treasures. So in Chinese medicine, you know about yin and yang, you know about energy circulating in the body in what are called qi pathways or qi channels or energy channels. The 3 treasures are associated, the body with the yin, which is the earth and substance, like I am substance to some extent, and I am non-substance to some extent. And then the boundless sky, the yang, is associated with the spiritual self. And you can already feel the relationship with Native American shamanism, with Druidic shamanism, with African shamanism. And then the middle dimension of our being, call that the mind or the heart mind, is associated with this idea in the Chinese philosophical and medical system of harmonizing the yin and the yang. And the name of this idea of harmonizing yin and yang in the Asian view is Tai Chi. So Tai Chi, yes, of course, it's a kind of breath practice and a mind-body practice, but actually originally, way back, the concept of Tai Chi means the merging and a harmonious interaction of the physical and the non-physical aspects of nature, including our own personal nature. Beautiful, just gorgeous how all these things work out. So we talked about the 3 treasures. Now let's talk about the primary powers. Time and focus are pretty much the same as practice and intent. Practice and intent means setting aside time and focusing on our intention. So when we are called upon by our awareness to do some breath practice because we've become overstressed, or we're trying to heal some physical syndrome, or we're intent upon, shall we say, refining our functional capacity, it requires enough presence of mind to be able to say, I'm going to change the pace and depth of my breath, and to set aside the time to do that. And of course, to take one deep breath just takes a few moments. So it's not going to basically screw the day if we take a few moments to slow down. So these 3 treasures of the mind and body practice create what we call 3 mindful points of focus. 3 mindful points of focus are body, breath, and mind. So as you can imagine, I'm going to turn my attention to my body, and I'm going to feel what I'm feeling consciously. So there's 2 definitions for feeling, by the way. There's the sensory feeling, and then there's there's sensory feeling, and then there's emotional feeling. So we look for the presence in the body, the breath, and the mind of signs of distress, and then refocalize ourselves. So when we bring our attention to the body, we adjust the posture and do some types of movements like yoga and Tai Chi and Qigong. When we bring our attention to the breath, we notice, am I breathing at a pace of 16 to 20 breaths a minute, or am I breathing at more like 5 to 7 breaths a minute? And then make a modification. Same with the mind. Notice how I've been pulled out of presence, and then use the breath to readjust and bring myself back into presence. Now, I'll just mention to you that the 4 dimensions of practice in yoga and Tai Chi and Qigong and probably any other system of mind-body practice are to adjust the body and move the body, to adjust the breath, deepen and lengthen the breath, or speed the breath up, the mind, bring the mind back to presence, and then the 4th part of all the mind-body practices of all the shamanic traditions from every culture include self-applied massage. So what we're focusing on today is the breath. And in the Chinese methodology of breath practice called Qigong, we use that to turn on the medicine. Remember, the most profound medicine is produced within the human body for free. So now let's turn that on. And I love this little phrase, LSD breathing. LSD breathing means long, slow, and deep. And so anywhere along the line here, you can take a longer, slower, deeper breath. When we coordinate this breath with movement, it actually maximizes the extent to which our function is, well, functioning. So it maximizes function. Turning our attention to the breath and making modifications maximizes function. Function of the 3 treasures. So we have a little bit of an understanding about how the body functions. Now let's think about how the mind functions, and then think whatever you like to have as a thought about how the spirit is functioning, whatever that might mean. How does a spirit function? Well, it takes on a body, clearly, and then the body has a certain bunch of experiences and traumas and victories and so forth. And all of that is having an influence on function. And of course, the increase of trauma in people's lives is represses function. And being confused represses or depresses function. Being angry, being caught in kind of a cycle of grief that cannot be broken. You know, all of these things are having a depreciating influence on function. And function, of course, is just everything about how our system, our body, mind, spirit system operates. So the breath in stillness, in other words, when we're meditating and we're being still, breath leads the practice. And when we do Tai Chi or Qigong, the breath guides the practice. Typically, the movement does not guide the practice. The breath guides the practice. So let's just talk about the history for a moment. The earliest record of something like breath practice, Qigong, in China is from a tomb around 300 BCE. So that's about 2,500 years ago. However, if you look into anthropology and archaeology, what we know is that humans were having meaningful conversations and conceptualizing the world uh, more than 100,000 years ago. And so I think it's probably safe to say that modifying the breath, imagine you're hunting and you want to be invisible. How do you modify the breath? Imagine the there's been the birth of a child and a fire is burning in the evening and we're all celebrating. How would we be modifying the breath in that moment? There might be moments of shouting, like gleeful shouting, and there might be moments of reverence, and the breath is changing so that we can ask the question, did the breath change because of the fact that it's a special occasion? Did the breath change because of the fact that for a while we were dancing and you always breathe more when you're dancing? Uh, and and then we were praying and you always slow down the breath when you're praying. Which came first? Was it the dancing or the celebrating? And how are they related? It's just such a beautiful story. In yoga, same earliest reliable records, something like breath practice, pranayama is around 300 BCE, about the same time, interestingly enough, primarily because that's when humans started writing things down. However, the same with the Indian culture. It's very difficult to determine when the earliest of the breath methods, purposeful breath methods, were developed. And so we don't know. It probably even more than 100,000 years. So now let's go to some of the medicine and science. So one of the first things that I learned in Chinese medicine was that uh, the lungs control the internal passage of water. What? You know, I'm from this place called Cincinnati, Ohio, and there was actually no mention of the fact that the lungs had anything to do with water. And I went to pre-medical school for a while and then went to Chinese medical school. And even in medical school, there was nothing about the lungs controlling the internal water passages. And yet, as I will show you in here in just a few moments, the lungs do, in fact, control water in the body. Amazing. And of course, we know that the lungs control the availability of air. So this is one of my favorite verses from the Tao Te Ching. And it has to do with, it's asking a question, can you modify your breath, move your body gently, and become as supple as a newborn with no cares? So it mentions the body and it mentions the breath. And then it asks the question about the mind and the heart. Can you actually purposefully occupy, live into a part of yourself that is supple and carefree? Beautiful. And that's from about 2,700 years ago. So then we could ask the question, was that person, Lao Tzu, was that person the first person who wrote this stuff down? And how long before Lao Tzu wrote this down did humans actually have this idea? And I personally speculate that humans had this idea 300, 500,000 years ago. And if you study archaeology, you know that humans were farming 10,000 years ago. But what came before farming was thousands and thousands and thousands of years of shamanic culture. So anyway, we can't tell, because to tell what humans are doing, you can only look at fire. They built fires, pottery, locations where things are laid out in a kind of a square or more linearly than nature, piles of bones from animals that were killed for food, or shells from the ocean or lakes and rivers where the humans used the inside of that shell for food. So none of that says anything about breath practice, but it does say that humans were alive, communicating, uh, developing mythologies for how their lives happened and so forth. So in the Chinese view, the breath harmonizes and activates the qi, and the qi is pretty directly associated with function. So you know all about inhaling and exhaling, so we won't linger here. Let's talk about the physiology of breath practice. And this is all mentioned in a book that I wrote called The Healer Within. So breath has to do with delivering oxygen, nitric oxide, NO, nitric oxide, and nutrition to the entire system. The breath accelerates lymph propulsion. That's the activation of the water internally by the breath. Breath practice, particularly when we slow the breath down and lengthen the exhalation, has a strong influence on the balance of the autonomic nervous system and the vagal system, which is the vagal nerve is the primary delivery system of impulses that go into organ function and so forth. Neurotransmitter shift, so shifting out of the adrenaline and cortisol function into the choline-based neurotransmitters. And the choline-based neurotransmitters are like oxytocin, based on feeling the sense of trust and peace and love, and serotonin, that has to do with rest and recovery, and endorphin, which has to do with pain management and pain relief. Slowing down the breath, which enhances the parasympathetic aspect of the autonomic nervous system, automatically turns on the immune function. So in other words, when we're stressed, immune function depreciates, and when we're, shall we say, modulating stress or neutralizing stress, and the immune function is enhanced. And then telomere nourishment. The telomere is the aspect of the DNA that supports the capacity of the DNA to replicate cells. So think to yourself, if the telomere goes to depreciation and can no longer support cell replication, Well, then what happens to the part? So let's talk about the eyes, or let's talk about the liver. If the cells of the liver are not able to replicate, then eventually liver function is going to depreciate. The cells of the eyes are not able to replicate, then the function of the eyes is going to depreciate. So, I mean, it's the bottom line basically on everything is the ability for the healthy cells to continue to be able to replicate themselves at the same pace that they did in the earlier part of one's life. What can we do about that? Well, enhance the sustainability of the telomeres. And there's lots of research on how relaxing enhances and even can help the telomeres to recover. And of course, we know that breath practice supports relaxation. So therefore, breath practice leads to relaxation response, which leads to the rehabilitation of the telomeres. Wow, I mean, that's the fountain of youth right there. All of this is associated with what scientists call homeostatic capacity. All right, so a little bit more on the breath. Let me just check the time. Okay, we're good. So pace. The usual breath pace is somewhere between 16 and 22 for average people, and that includes average, fairly well people. There's a very, very few well people who breathe at a pace less than 16 when they're not paying attention to the breath. So now let's just go to the upper right, and you can see that up to 30 breaths a minute reveals that a person is losing functional capacity and may even be approaching their demise. And even at a pace of 18, which is pretty common for a lot of people, even well people, it's declared by, you know, whoever made this particular little image as a person who is sick. And I would interpret that to say a person who's living in a state of stress. And then we go to normal. It is very unusual for people to breathe at 12 breaths a minute. You can train yourself to breathe at 12 breaths a minute, but it's very unlikely for average people to be able to sustain 12 breaths a minute. So what that means is that average is not normal, or normal is not average, one of those. And then look at this ideal breath pattern, 3 breaths a minute. So who does that? Well, people who do yoga do that, people who do meditation do that, and people who do Qigong and Tai Chi do that. It's very common among people who have a personal practice to be very comfortable with 3 breaths a minute. And I suggest you use your phone, go to the place where your alarm clock is, click on the timer, start the timer, and count how many breaths you do in just relaxed breaths that you do in a minute. And then start the timer over and see how long you can hold your breath, or how long you can make the duration of a breath, not so much holding, but just spreading it out. It's very informative. And because when we do breath practice, we get better at it over time. And so when you use that timer, you know, like 2 weeks from now, if you've been doing breath practice for 2 weeks and you haven't typically been doing breath practice, you'll find that you can more easily breathe at a slower pace, and you can more easily get to a pace of 3 to 4 breaths per minute. Then let's look at the point down below, which is an image of a particular breath practice. So let's just do it. We'll do it super quick. First one is a big, deep, relaxed breath. And then we breathe normally for as many times as you wish. And then take another deep, slow, relaxed breath, or long, slow, deep breath. Or for short, we can say LSD breath. So take a big LSD breath, breathe normally for 5 or 7 or 10 or 12 breaths, and then exhale, and then take another LSD breath, long, slow, deep breath. Now, for those of you who are interested in what is the medicine, if breath is a medicine, what actually, in a functional sort of way, is the medicine? So let's look at the bottom one first. This is where the lungs are in charge of water passages in the human body. Belly breath is where we drop the diaphragm, and it compresses all of the organs below the diaphragm. And the liver is here, the spleen and the pancreas are here, the kidneys are at the back underneath the diaphragm. And as you can see in the picture of that gentleman there with the kind of white looking balloon that's in the belly, that's called the cisterna chyli. Chyli is the Latin for lymph. And so the cisterna chyli is pumping. When you compress the diaphragm down, it shoots the lymph forward. Maybe you remember, lymph can't go backwards, it can only go forwards. So it just creates a fountain of internal body water, which is carrying all kinds of metabolic byproducts, that is, toxins. In other words, the metabolism is done and now it needs to be excreted, call that a metabolite. And the belly breath is accelerating internal water flow. And then, and of course, the immune cells are traveling in the lymph. So it speeds, when you do breath practice, it speeds the rate at which the lymph is being propelled, and it's carrying the immune cells to the sites where the immune cells are needed, and it is the foundation of the elimination system. Now let's look at these two images up above. We learn in yoga that belly breathing is very important, and it kind of chest breathing gets sort of pushed aside. But it turns out that the upper left-hand picture shows stretch receptors in the lungs. And the stretch receptors in the lungs send, when you take a deep enough breath, you have to deepen the breath. It can't just be a survival breath. It has to be a purposeful, deeper breath, unless you're in a celebration where you're shouting and singing or doing exercise, which also increases the stretch receptors. The stretch receptors do the same thing as the baroreceptors. So let's go over to the right-hand image at the top. And in the rib cage, where the heart, the assembly of functions of the heart are contained, is what are called baroreceptors. And baro means, like in barometer, pressure. So when you raise the pressure within the rib cage, it has an influence on the baroreceptors. And so the lung stretch receptors and the cardiac baroreceptors are both sending impulses into the nervous system, brain and spine, which then trigger the release of acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is the choline-based molecule that is the foundation of all parasympathetic, or shall we say vagal, function. And so the bottom part, the medicine, is discharging metabolites and delivering immune cells. And for the chest breath, the medicine is actually neurohormones, neurotransmitters that are being released into the blood like drugs. So in other words, chest breathing in a purposeful sort of way creates creates chemicals, drugs that circulate in the body and produce the healing response. Okay, so then let's go to checking time again. So we're going to do in here in just a few moments, we're going to do 2-part breath, 3-part breath, 4-part breath, 5-part breath. And so when you see the recording of this presentation, you can pick up on all of that. We'll just call it the 2, 3, 4, and 5-part breaths. And let's just understand one thing. Elixir. Our culture that believes that medicine is something that has to come from someplace else. The ancients believed that the most important medicine was produced within the person in accord with their natural destiny. And of course, in accord with the extent of their practice and their focus and their intentions and, all of that. So when we do these breath practices for the 3 treasures, we're making a medicine, an elixir for the body. We're making an elixir for the mental, emotional self. And we're making an elixir, it's interesting, instead of saying for the spirit, I'm using the word of the spirit, an elixir of the spirit. And what I mean by that is that it's very possible that the awareness of our eternal nature is a medicine, a profound elixir. The awareness of our personal eternal nature is a powerful, powerful medicine. So then how do we weave this into our life? Well, you've probably had many discussions about this, but I'll just say that the easiest way for people to begin to weave breath practice into their life is to do it when they're going to bed, because you're not doing anything else except for just getting ready to fall asleep. So this is time that a human can use to focus consciousness and do breath practice. And in a moment here, we'll do some breath practice, and you can imagine doing that as you're going to sleep. So let's breathe peace, an elixir for the world and all beings. And before we jump to practice, I just want to say a little something about the our spiritual self. Ask yourself this question: is the spirit of myself separate from all beings? Or is the spirit of myself part of a community of eternal presence? Or, when you get to the highest level of human nature, and science can't even get anywhere near a discussion about it, it's hard to use language. Maybe you know that when people have debates about spiritual issues, you can be very emotional about it, but it's almost impossible to actually articulate what it is that you're trying to say. So when we do these breath practices and we're making these elixirs, I want to just point to the fact that the spirit elixir is basically a medicine that is not contained in my personal being. It is a medicine that is diffuse into the quantum nature of all being. And so as we're doing the 2-part, 3-part, 4-part, and 5-part breathing, uh, you're going to be responsible, and maybe I'll remind you, but you're going to be responsible for getting a sense of, well, how could this be influencing my body? How could this be influencing my psychology, my mental, emotional self? And how could this be influencing the community of all beings and things beyond space-time in the eternal realm of the boundless and timeless? And before we go on, I want to just say one more thing, and that is, imagine this. Listen to this. It's a phrase from an ancient Chinese text. It goes like this. There's an aspect of ourself which is irrevocably well, cannot get sick, and does not die. There's an aspect of self that is irrevocably well, cannot get sick, and does not die. Okay, so checking on time, and want to just go through these breath practices, and then we'll weave them into what we call a breath symphony. And I want you to see if you can keep the awareness that while we're making an elixir for the body and the psychology, that we're also making medicine, profound medicine, that is a part of some kind of community of eternal spirit, or, I mean, how do you say it? So let's don't just try to talk about it, let's do it. So remember, these are 4 breath patterns that are common to all ancient cultures. And you'll recognize them, they're very, very common. And then they get expressed in different ways by different cultures. The first one, 2-part breath, is simply breathing in and breathing out, but doing so LSD, long, slow, and deep. So let's take a long, slow, deep breath in, and I'll use my hands just to, you can do this too, by the way. It becomes a Qigong practice when you get the body going too. So big breath in, and then exhale very slowly. Making medicine for the 3 treasures: body, the mental emotional self, and the transcendental community. 3-part breath is to basically break the inhalation into 2 parts. So a belly part, which accelerates the propulsion of water, and a chest part, which releases acetylcholine-based molecules from the nervous system, which then bring about the parasympathetic response, which is to rest, recover, digest, trust, feel safe, be at peace. So, belly breath, chest breath, and exhale slowly. Three parts. 4-part breath. We do a belly, a chest, and then we hold. And then exhale slowly. Here we go. Deep belly breath, deep chest breath. Now hold your breath. Now, some people can hold their breath for like 3 minutes. We're going to let go now. Exhale very slowly. Allowing the exhalation to be slower than the inhalation is one of the things that scientists have been able to penetrate through to understanding that it has an influence on the increasing vagal function, which is renew, rehabilitate, rest, recover, heal. So that's the 4-part breath. Now let's go 5-part breath. The 5-part breath is interesting because it's not that comfortable for most people, and it requires a certain amount of, shall we say, discipline and focus. And that has to do with uh, holding the breath out. So first we do belly, then we do chest, then we hold for a moment, exhale very slowly, and hold your breath out. And usually most people aren't that comfortable holding their breath out. And so you breathe in, now breathe in, big breath, and exhale slowly. So there's a lot more that could be said. I'm going to leave it there. You can imagine weaving these breaths together. In other words, you can do the 2-part breath as many times as you want, 3-part breath as many times as you want, 4-part breath as many times as you want, 5-part breath as many times as you want. You can do them in any order. So now I'm going to turn it to you, and I'm just going to ring this gong 3 times, and we'll probably be right around time. So the point here is, remember, we're making 3 elixirs for 3 treasures. We're making an elixir for the body. We're making an elixir for the heart, mind, the psychological and intellectual self. And we're making an elixir that is in some way associated with the transcendental nature of our being. And as I'm ringing this gong and you're doing your breath symphony, which is basically to modify and enhance the breath practice in whatever way you wish, using these methods or any other method that you know, let's particularly focus on the world. So basically, that's the spirit elixir. And the first sign of the fact that you're disassociated from the spiritual elixir is that you're questioning and doubting and thinking things that you always think. If you can go to no questions, no doubt, and transcend habitual thinking, you are making elixir in some way that cannot be described, that is directly associated with the aspect of ourselves, which is boundless, timeless, and in community with all beings across all universes. 3 gongs. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your interest in this international breath possibility.